The topic we're discussing today is looking at procurement and looking at how we can work with our suppliers on decarbonization. This is something that's come up in a few of the sessions that I've moderated so far today, but we wanted to do more of a deep dive into the particulars of it. So for this panel, we have Bernard Conquering, the president of the Henkel Global Supply Chain and chief procurement officer for Henkel, Eduardo Bachiega, the chief supply chain officer at Nomad Foods, and Alexander Schmidt, the head of science, sustainability, and climate research at Normative. So to sort of set the stage, I wanted to lead off with Bertrand. At Henkel, this is a good sort of case study. What incentives and initiatives do you sort of like draw on to try and encourage your suppliers to adopt more sustainable practices? Just sort of setting the stage very broadly.
So very broadly, number one, you can set targets if you recognize as CPO that it is in your hands, number one. So it is not something that CPOs may escape. It is not on the agenda of the CSOs. The CPO has to take care. And this is very, very important to set the stage immediately, because then you can have an understanding of the cliff and the agenda. This is why, even before going to suppliers, it is so important to understand the topics. How does it fit with strategy? What is the ambition that we have into the company? What do we want to deliver by when? Because the what has been delivered, but the how has not been. And the how is in our hands as CPOs. So that's number one. Number two, it is collaboration, finding peers and working with peers as much as we can, because we don't have time. It is an agenda for 2030, not to 20 whatever. There is an urgency. So collaboration is key. Collaboration between peers. That's why, for example, at Henkel, we have the luxury, if I may say today, 15 years later, to have Together for Sustainability, where we have raised a lot of activities together to manage and to understand what is at stake. And now you talk about suppliers. It is engaging with suppliers, being clear on what do we want. And what do we want is not only what a company wants, it's a company committing to and delivering that message to suppliers associated into the value chain. Number two, it is to understand that we're all operating into an ecosystem. And it is not to change for one company, one supplier, or 20. It is to change a complete ecosystem to have a relevant impact, not only on my company, but at the end of the day, on planet, on people, and on prosperity. So Scope 3 is a huge agenda for all of us, starting in CPOs, organizations, procurement by procurement, with many, many stakeholders, and changing the game from there. And asking suppliers to engage into that agenda is then super relevant. License to operate for the future, scalability of answers to multiply this into the ecosystem, and ability to engage into redesign of that footprint, which is not sustainable when it comes to product, when it comes to innovation. So this is where it changes the game. So then there is a big reward by going into that agenda. Not only stopping at compliance and having the license to operate, but also generating innovation and bringing the suppliers the best into that agenda. It is not a one-year agenda. It is all about maturity, segmentation, and so on. It's education, it's scalability to make that super, super fast, and then to have the chance to change the game, and then to put it into the business strategy of the organization, and from there, getting the reward at customers, meaning at suppliers.
It's a very thorough explanation across the piece. Targets, finding peers, feeding into the ecosystems. I want to drill down a bit more onto some of the targets and numbers and bring Alexander into this. Normative, you're working to develop tools to better develop the relationship between firms and their suppliers. What is the data that is most important for firms, for suppliers? What's the sort of key points that you find that are most necessary for managing the sort of relationships that Bertrand is talking about?
I guess the response is who is asking, because that is often a different set of interests there. So you have regulators, of course. They ask, I mean, we heard about CSRD before, EU CBAM, we have all these acronyms being thrown around. They need certain data points from you. Investors increasingly ask for data points from you. Your consumers, your customers, depending on your industry, they ask for data points, of course. And then very crucially, and you made a very, very good point there, I believe, internally, like what's there, the value of the data that you gather. And so depending on honestly who was asking, your answer might change. So it can be a bit overwhelming, definitely, but it can also, if you drill it down to the key important metrics, what we see over and over again is the basics around greenhouse gas emissions data. This is kind of like non-negotiable, like it's always there, and quantifiable rather accurately. And the second point is around targets, reduction strategies. Where are you moving towards? So we don't just know where you stand right now, but also where are you moving towards. So if you drill this down to these like common denominators, we actually see now consistency. Oh, actually, yes, regulators, investors, my consumers, and also internal teams, they need exactly those data points. So you start with an overwhelming amount of requests, but actually can usually do that down to a few key data points around greenhouse gas emissions, targets, and reduction strategies.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, obviously the discussion today is mostly about suppliers and supply chains. Have we reached a point where upstream, downstream suppliers are generally speaking the same language in terms of what data they want, what data they're trying to get, or is that still a very long and convoluted process to try and get your company, your suppliers, your customers, maybe even the regulators, all on the same page in terms of data?
We're working on it, but we're definitely, I think you practitioners can attest to this, we're not there yet entirely. Luckily, regulators start to communicate, who would have thought, but now they actually come to the conclusion that they need to align the requests, otherwise they will not get anywhere. Also, the requests towards suppliers are getting increasingly standardized. Yet you have to acknowledge the reality of suppliers being at different stages of maturity. You can't request a small mom-and-pop shop from from some other country that it might be very, very far away to have the same ability also and reporting kind of abilities. Then has one of your top tier one suppliers that is a big European-based conglomerate of whatever goods or services. So you will get a diverse set of supplier data, and the regulators are also asking for a diverse set of data. So that's exactly where also normative comes in terms of standardizing these requests and making sure that whatever comes in as a very diverse set of data is getting standardized and you can easily make sense of it. You don't have to draw it through thousands of lines in spreadsheets.
Right. I want to bring Eduardo into this. We sort of talked a bit on the high level, so I wanted to sort of ask you what you feel like, how you feel this relates to your business on the ground. Is these the sort of challenges that you see in Nomad Foods, or are there particular challenges that are unique to your business that you think are particularly important to be overcome?
I think that it's a little bit a combination of what both of them are talking. So when we talk about scope 1 and 2, it's pretty clear that it's within our boundaries, and we can set the metrics and we can control and we invest. And it's quite easy compared to the scope 3 to find the return on investment, because as you reduce energy consumption, you can see the financial benefit. The key challenge is around scope 3, and when we start thank you. Better now? No? Yes, thank you. So when you start talking about scope 3, I think Alexander mentioned the challenge is operating with a different level of maturity of partners. When we start thinking about Nomad Foods, we produce everything from ice creams to fish. So we talk about very different supply chains, very different level of maturities of suppliers, and engaging them in a platform, in a set of metrics that makes sense is part of our challenge. But I believe that, as Bertrand mentioned, we have a role to play in the industry. We need to lead from the front. We need to engage, and we're never going to find the solutions by ourselves. It's about create partnerships and engaging peers, competitors, and eventually retailers into this journey. That we have a couple of good examples of where we are able to achieve this type of engagement. For example, we just engage our 3PLs, our customers, and some of our suppliers in a coalition to increase the temperature across all the chain. And this reduces our overall carbon emission, but something that by far we would not be able to do alone by ourselves. So it's a collaboration. I think collaboration is a key aspect.
Yeah. I want to open the floor to questions at some point, but so feel free to raise your hand if you have anything you'd like to ask. But in the meantime, I'd like to ask Bertrand to sort of expand a bit on the issue of supply chains and of counterparties of different sizes. I know you mentioned the ecosystem, that you have the power, that one firm has the power to push things forward. But how do you deal with suppliers who don't necessarily have the same capacity, who aren't necessarily at the same level of maturity or the same sophistication of data, especially given how broad a supply chain like that can be?
If I would like to refocus on something which is absolutely essential, which is to establish methodologies and languages. I think this is something which can be across all the elements into the value chain. And this is what we have deeply understood at Together for Sustainability. Just to take the case of Scope 3, we decided in 2019, I think it was, that we need to get equipped into this ecosystem with a methodology. What is the product carbon footprint? And to have a product carbon footprint methodology that we will understand and we'll be able to manage across the entire ecosystem. Easy said, 20 companies worked, 18 months, have a methodology. We have not reinvented the wheel, we took what we had to take, but also we had that done. B, we need to be able to exchange. We have engaged, we have looked around the globe, and we found a platform at Siemens, Seagreen, to exchange the data and to have this encryption. So what I mean by this, and then now we bring it into a TFS academy. And that academy can really size the problem and to address the problem to different maturity level that we have. So what we can offer, it's skills. It's the knowledge. The knowledge must be delivered for free. We need to have that knowledge. We need to design the knowledge for the environment into which we are working. Chemical industry is maybe different in terms of specification than aeronautic or others, or food. But take the experience of one, translate it to another one, and bring it into an ecosystem. So language. So from that, we answer to the question of what's the challenge. It is not a question of mid-size or small companies or big companies. It's a matter of inviting, recognizing, and being ready to learn. Of course, being ready to learn. It's not a free lunch. It is really being able to operate for tomorrow, and then to get that education. But that education is a collective education. And from there, we can have the start of exchanging data that we can use in the reporting, as we just saw it, in an automated way, quickly, but even more important, to have this data reaching our product development, our designs. So that's a journey of 3 years, 6 years, and 9 years, but this is so important to do it. So scalability on knowledge, scalability on product carbon footprint methodologies, scalability in ability to execute very, very fast at ecosystem.
And then in terms of something you said at the beginning, in terms of the chief procurement officer has the power to just do it, how does that relate to the business model as a whole? Is this something that sort of is percolating and is changing Henkel's business model across the piece, or is this something that's still just sort of seen as more incidental to the particulars?
No, it is to recognize that, number one, this activity is under the lead of, so Scope 1, Scope 2, more of manufacturing, supply chain, and then Scope 3 on the scope of the procurement, and then to realize, okay, how can I do it? And I think it's up to us to reflect deeply that topic, to say, how can I do it into this time frame, not having also the budget, not the resources. So we have that answer with the TFS. We have also this answer with the sustainable procurement pledge that we have developed and designed in a couple of years ago, to engage and to mobilize the entire procurement organizations, to the point that at a certain point of time, it becomes, I would call it even a speedboat into the execution of the strategy of the company. So Together for Sustainability, for example, is fundamentally embedded into the supplier to customer activities into Henkel. And also many and all other partners and members of that initiative. Now, Together for Sustainability, it is 13 years of work. So hopefully the next one can do it faster in 5 years. And then to mobilize the industry into the very different segments where these initiatives have to be managed, because no one can do it alone. Mm-hmm. No one.
We had a question from the audience right there. I think there's a mic coming.
I think it's becoming clear from this discussion that there has to be some sort of a collaboration with peers, otherwise known as competitors. Mm-hmm. So my question is, where do you think the line should be drawn between collaborating to achieve these goals that we all collectively want to achieve, and then being accused of, violating competition rules, basically, oversharing, over-agreeing on some sort of standards or common data sharing platforms? Where do you think that line should be drawn?
Alexander, do you want to start, and then we can
maybe I can actually,
talk about
because
individual firms?
Even though we're not, doing so. these two can definitely have more insights into the business practices there. But let me maybe reflect on this. I work a lot with policymakers, with academia together, and there's something that we call the like pre-competitive collaboration that is so critical. So there's one time CO2 article that we've been writing together earlier this year. Can highly recommend it. I think it's a nice read on the topic, where everyone has an incentive to engage in pre-competitive collaboration. For example, WPCSD is setting a data standard for like what actually, to your point around standardization, you mentioned Henkel, internally, so to speak, as to consistency in methodology, in data, etc. But that also has to be valid across companies, because your suppliers are going to be someone else's suppliers as well. So with a normative, we call it the carbon network, where we say, hey, data points from one supplier are of value to other buyers as well. But we need to agree on data standards. It cannot be that one company collects it in a certain format, another company asks for different data points, and or the data submitted come in very, very different shapes, form, and sizes. So we have to agree on, if we ask for a carbon footprint, what actually are we asking for? If we ask for energy consumption, what is the format in which we want to receive it? So that way we can reduce also the reporting burden for suppliers to make it easier, as hopefully submitting it once in a certain format, then they have it at hand to any kind of supplier buyer asking for it. So I don't really see a kind of it critical from any kind of competition laws point of view, because it's in everyone's interest to have data readily accessible, to be able to have them in a reliable, accurate format, and not having to reinvent the wheel, and hopefully having easy access to the data. That is something that also automotive industry, they're collaborating a lot on these databases actually. So you see there are highly competitive organizations, otherwise competitive organizations, coming together and saying, no, we all need this data. And there's no advantage in us kind of cooking up our own recipe. There's an advantage in really coming together as an industry and setting standards. But you probably have also very good views on this.
Yeah. Eduardo Bertrand?
Yeah, I think we all need to recognize that, at least in Nomad Foods, the food supply chain is complex. So it's almost impossible to have a standardized aspect when you start with human or nature-dependent ingredients. So it's the data, the standardization of the data, the standardization of parameters doesn't mean that you're going to standardize commercial terms. It's just a guarantee that you have a common understanding of what are the areas that you need to focus. I think that what he's bringing, and is quite important, is when we focus, like many companies were able to focus to reduce green gas emissions, you really achieve the results. But the challenge that we have when you start talking about scope 3 is where we focus, where is the opportunity, and where we're going to mobilize across the different industries to really achieve the benefits that we all need. So I think that there is a long journey between talking about competition risks versus a level of completely disharmonization that we have today in the industry.
Pragmatically, invite a lawyer in the room. It helps. And then it is also praxis. And there are a lot of practices where you know what are the limits. And we are all professionals, so we know exactly what is the frame, where we go, where we cannot go. But always have a lawyer in these type of organizations can be very helpful. And number two, I think it is so important to go beyond. The exchange is on the methodology. The exchange is on the standard, on the harmonization, on the best practice. So this is the knowledge that you could get, but you accelerate it when you focus onto your industry. Then you need to build up skills, but the skills is what you will develop into your company. And I think this is what and you can also share some best practices, but never go in commercials. Never go in everything like this. And we had a discussion, for example, into the exchange of data through this platform. So this is why the data are encrypted, because the data contain the content of a specific company. So we do not have access to the data. It is just access. We have developed together the streams, the highways. The car, what is in the car? We don't know. And we don't need to know.
Any other questions from the audience? One other thing that sort of the question around coordination sort of begs the question around the difference between what can be done with the private sector and what would require sort of coordination from the public sector. Alexander, you talked a bit about sort of dealing with regulators in terms of standardizing data, but also dealing with counterparties. How much of this do you think sort of can spring up organically, and how much of this do you think is going to need to have some sort of buy-in or direction from the public sector?
Yeah. So I love to talk about this in terms of kind of like digging the tunnel from both ends and communicating well, because otherwise you know that when you start digging from two ends, you might end up somewhere like this and you won't match and you won't meet in the middle. So I think it's important to work ground up, but also top down. So ground up, meaning we need to have the infrastructure, data-wise agreements on, yes, these are data points. If I speak about a certain emission data point, that's exactly what I mean with this. Greenhouse gas protocol as a standard is highly imperfect, but it is the best we have, and we work from it. And then top down, we need to have the right policies and governance mechanisms in place to ensure that we also get the right incentive structure. Because right now, let's face it, the incentive structure at the market are just not there, or they're even incentivizing the wrong practices. They're incentivizing more of business as usual, which is quite exploitative and not helpful at all. So standardizing it, there's one initiative I want to mention, Rewired Earth. This is a UK-based initiative, and a lot of companies have been engaging with this to really set foundational infrastructure for data exchange, for example, for transparency, for alignment. That is important. Another one I'm working with quite closely is Mobilizing Earth Governance Alliance, which is more on the top down. So we need global governance, period. It doesn't help that the EU has great relations in place. We heard it in the CBAM panel before. It's all a global issue. Yeah. So it's nice that the EU is starting something, and UK also is now, having their own CBAM version, but ultimately we need to come together globally. Otherwise, there will be incentives, once more, to just offshore it, to just go somewhere else, and there it's same business as usual. So top down, bottom up, we need both at the same time, and good communication, breaking up silos, working together, and not trying to reinvent the wheel over and over again. That's what I see. It drives me crazy, to be honest, when I just see organizations and especially in civil society, great ideas, great plans, and they work in silos, and they don't communicate, they don't have real business plans behind it. So that's also what I'm trying to, beyond normative, of course, trying to establish more in the field, collaboration and acceleration of really best practices and standards.
I think if there's no other questions are there any other more questions from the audience? I think there's two now. The woman in the middle, and then the woman we can take them in batches.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a question for Bertrand. Just keen to get your thoughts on how best to engage a CPO. Obviously, it's really great to see you so engaged, but I think there are a lot of heads of procurement who aren't necessarily as engaged on the topic. So, any advice?
Another question, and then we can take them both.
So similarly, how do CPOs best, or Chief Supply Chain Officers best empower their CSOs to make sure that their agenda is actually driven forward?
I think these questions are both for Bertrand. How do you engage a CPO? And how does a CPO
Maybe first to the last one. Luckily, we have a super relationship with our CSO. So we have a very good relationship and learning a lot. So then meaning that we can put that into really the collaboration and the focus of the strategy of that we have into the company. And then for the CPOs, this is the learning for me of my journey with Together for Sustainability. I realized we started the conversation with 5 other CPOs in 2010 when the target was how can we develop sustainable supply base. And we know from the example of others industry it's extremely difficult. And then we decided, why don't we invent one audit for one is an audit for all? We had no clue, but we have designed in a program. And we have said we will not delegate it, we will do it ourselves. And then 2 years later, TFS is born. And then from there, we have been able to develop assessments and audits. We found EcoVadis was still a startup. We targeted, we combined our efforts together, partnership, and then auditors, and we moved on. Then we created Together for Sustainability Academy to share, to engage in all the regions around the globe with suppliers, and to share, but also to listen to them and to penetrate the supply base and to have a dialogue across. And then we create this methodology for carbon, Scope 3. Learning, plenty of CPOs, you have plenty of CPOs everywhere ready to engage. Find them and create the association And then at the end of the day, impossible is really possible. And the same in the sustainability procurement pledge. When we had this vision 5 years ago with Thomas, we have decided that we want to have all the procurement professionals around the globe because we all do the same. We decide with which company we want to work. In other words, imagine that all the procurement professionals of all private and public companies would all foster their jobs according to the UN Global Compact. And same methodologies, we change the world. We talk about more than $10 trillion. 5 years later, we still exist. We were even invited with the World Economic Forum, with the UN Business Compact at the Climate Week. And we start partnership across procurement. So this is what has not been yet captured. We had no CSOs at that level we have today. Now we have. CPOs, they are there. We just need to engage together, and I see the progress across. I'm super optimistic. The next 5 years is definitely something we can change.
I think what I would add is, in our case, what we did is we don't have a sustainability strategy or a supply chain strategy. We have a business strategy, and we all work around it. So I think our head of sustainability made a very good work to incorporate all the aspects of sustainability in our business strategy. So it's easier for me and for my procurement team to engage toward, because we are working in the business strategy. So the key is not setting different lanes, because the goal is be profitable, grow in a sustainable way. So it's very easy to follow.
Yes.
Well, we're almost out of time, so I think that unless there are any other people with burning questions, I'm going to cordially invite everybody to join us for a drinks reception upstairs. This has been an excellent panel. We've discussed a lot about ecosystems, competition, data management, trying to work with suppliers, procurers. Had a lot of very interesting questions in terms of how to engage with CPOs and how to engage it up and down the value chain. It just leaves me to thank Bertrand, Eduardo, and Alexander, and please feel free to join us for a drinks reception upstairs now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.